Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to the Richard James Show on 17104, The Voice. It is truly a blessing to see another day. The sun is shining brightly, and I am before you. Had back surgery about a month ago and still recovering from some of that, but truly blessed to be here and to be able to share with you counsel, information, history, poetry, music, that kind of thing. Now, I'm going to lift up today the legacy and history of the affirmative action program. I'm going to lift up the legacy and history of affirmative action. What is affirmative action? Affirmative action was a concept that was developed to try to create equal opportunity, freedom, justice, and equality for all people, concentrating its efforts on those who had been discriminated against. And the people who were most discriminated against in this country in different ways were African Americans. Others were discriminated against, also Native Americans, for example, Hispanics, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans. Anything that wasn't Anglo-Saxon, wasn't white, was discriminated against. And some whites face different forms of discrimination. Let's tell it like it is. People who, for example, were disabled, who happened to be white. White women, in spite of some of them going along with and being a part of the bigotry that was heaped on people, women as such, discrimination in terms of employment, placement in positions of responsibility were discriminated against, and minorities. And let me make it clear that blacks were not the only minorities that faced discrimination. Asian Americans, who helped to build the railroads and helped to build this country and this nation, faced some horrific forms of discrimination. Why did I name black folks as number one? Lynchings at a rate of sometimes 300 and 400 a year in different states. Slavery, formal and informal slavery, in which people were robbed of their dignity, their humanity, and were even designated as one-fifth of a human being. When Thomas Jefferson, who loved his black women, Sally Henning, in which he had a number of children, uh, fathers, a number of children, uh, all of them, they had slaves. And they were slave owners, and they came out of Virginia, the South. Let's not forget that. George Washington was a Southerner, and so was Thomas Jefferson, a Southerner. These individuals, even though they spoke out and fought for and was helped to make this land a free nation from the United Kingdom and from France and other countries, uh, also committed acts of discrimination and racism. The history of this country has been one of brutality, uh, one of discrimination, and that's been its history. It's not to condemn all people, because some people were white and black, gave their lives in order to tear down the walls of bigotry. You think of the three individual college students who came down for the summer to help with the voting was because in Mississippi, two of those three students were white. Let's not remember that we cannot afford, if we want to be free and be free at last, we cannot afford to condemn all people because it just ain't real. It's just not true. Legacy and history of discrimination in this country has been long. It's been long and it's been wide. I want to just read a piece here for you that I wrote and this was the book that I published uh, called "We Found." I wrote, that is, I didn't publish it. It was published by a publishing company, Roberts Publishing. But I wrote called "We Found the Victory: The Struggle for Love and Freedom in Prose." Oh, freedom! Oh, oh, freedom! Oh, freedom! Oh, freedom! Over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Man's will is the most powerful source of energy in the world. When you couple it with his ability to make his own decisions, even when unfair restrictions are placed on his ability to decide the road that he wants to travel, he will rise up against all odds and express himself in spite of the chains that binds him. When mankind stood on two legs and began to explore the world, he roamed the earth, searching, looking for new adventures that help civilization to grow. No one can enslave someone who wants to be free. Only for a limited time will man permit himself to be under restriction. Jewish people looked at Hitler's reign of terror and said, never again, never again, never again. Black people clenched their fists and said, Black power. All people who are born to be free. Regardless of race or color, all people will fight at some point oppression. God created a world built on freedom. Freedom, oh freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Mankind's search for freedom will never end. His love for life and his ability to live without restriction is God's greatest gift. I encourage all people to support freedom for all people. This country was born out of man's struggle for religious freedom. We fought a civil war over slavery. America is the birthplace of democracy. Let us continue to ensure that all people have a right to be free. So this tool called affirmative action, a lot of people were involved in different phases in the development of this particular tool. And many people give credit, and rightfully so, to JFK or John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who said we stand on the edge of a new frontier, a set of hopes and challenges. Fitzgerald was one of the first presidents to come out and talk about racism and discrimination. Franklin Delano Roosevelt did not do it, even though he did some things to save our economy and to save our nation uh, in a time of economic peril during the Great Depression. He maintained racist policies in terms of government, in terms of armed forces. He incarcerated and jailed Japanese Americans who were citizens only because of their ethnic heritage and not because of their alliance to the Empire of Japan, which we were at war at. He did that. So no, I'm not going to raise up racism. And I know you don't want to hear it because you ate some of that good old cheese that he used to send out in the mail. Uh, Spam. In other words, he fed the poor. And I give him credit for that. I give him credit for that. He also was very much involved in developing public housing in this country. I lived in that public housing. Thank God for the public housing. But it was segregated. We were still treated under Franklin Delano Roosevelt like we were less than human beings. And I don't forgive him for that. He did it. And the positive things that came out of that Roosevelt administration came from Eleanor Roosevelt, his wife, that insisted on some changes and was able to accomplish some of those things. Eleanor Roosevelt. But getting back to the development of affirmative action, a man by the name of Art Fletcher. Art Fletcher was a professional football player, played for the Los Angeles Rams. Powerful man, standing tall, strong. He was Deputy Secretary for the Department of Labor and Industry under, believe it or not, Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon is not thought very kindly by most African Americans because he, along with his other cronies in government, were responsible for the murder uh, of Fred Hampton and some of the other African American leaders. That's a fact. That happened. But the interesting thing about his, it was a tale of two administrations. He also created a business Office of Business Administration and affirmative action program in terms of business. That was his creation. But Art Fletcher was basically responsible for the establishment of affirmative action in this country and the development of that plan, which was adopted in the Nixon administration. Now, in 1964, we had the Civil Rights Act, which gave us the legal foundation for establishing uh, the law that says that you cannot discriminate against anyone because of race, creed, or color. Uh, that was established and written and signed into law by Lyndon Baines Johnson, a Southern, another Southern, from the good old state of Texas. And he developed also contract compliance programs to make sure that individuals under the contract compliance program could not discriminate anyone, particularly that had federal contracts, and that included state government and other kinds of things. Where was it born? Why was it born? Why was it created? There was a gentleman by the name of Cecil B. Moore, Esquire, attorney from Philadelphia, who had protested racism and discrimination at Girard College, which was located in the middle of the black community in North Philadelphia. And he marched, demonstrated, and he gained the support of Art Fletcher in that adventure. And Art Fletcher wanted to come up with a plan with these trade unions who were involved in construction, particularly where there's federal money involved, would have to hire people based on their qualifications, not based on their race. So, with the help of Cecil B. Moore, Esquire, and some of us refer to him affectionately as the Mau Mau president of the NAACP, and Art Fletcher worked together to develop, historically, the first affirmative action program. Both of them are now deceased, but thank God for them. Now we have a couple of videos that we're going to talk, we're going to throw in. We're going to continue our dialogue on the legacy and history of affirmative action. And I'm going to give you some of my history and background in affirmative action. But right now we're going to stop, pause, and look at a video where other folks are raising this.
Funding for this program is provided by. Additional funding provided by.
Today, we turn to the question of distributive justice. How should income and wealth and power and opportunities be distributed? According to what principles? John Rawls offers a detailed answer to that question. And we're going to examine and assess his answer to that question today. We put ourselves in a position to do so last time by trying to make sense of why he thinks that principles of justice are best derived from a hypothetical contract. And what matters is that the hypothetical contract be carried out in an original position of equality behind what Rawls calls the veil of ignorance. So that much is clear. All right, then let's turn to the principles that Rawls says would be chosen behind the veil of ignorance. First, he considers some of the major alternatives. What about utilitarianism? Would the people in the original position choose to govern their collective lives? Utilitarian principles, the greatest good for the greatest number. No, they wouldn't, Rawls says. And the reason is that behind the veil of ignorance, everyone knows that once the veil goes up and real life begins, we will each want to be respected with dignity. Even if we turn out to be a member of a minority, we don't want to be oppressed. And so we would agree to reject utilitarianism and instead to adopt as our first principle equal basic liberties, fundamental rights to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, religious liberty, freedom of conscience, and the like. We wouldn't want to take the chance that we would wind up as members of an oppressed or a despised minority with the majority tyrannizing over us. And so Rawls says utilitarianism would be rejected. Utilitarianism makes the mistake, Rawls writes, of forgetting, or at least not taking seriously, the distinction between persons. And in the original position behind the veil of ignorance, we would recognize that and reject utilitarianism. We wouldn't trade off our fundamental rights and liberties for any economic advantages. That's the first principle. Second principle has to do with social and economic inequalities. What would we agree to? Remember, we don't know whether we're going to wind up being rich or poor, healthy or unhealthy. We don't know what kind of family we're going to come from, whether we're going to inherit millions or whether we will come from an impoverished family. So we might, at first thought, say, well, let's require an equal distribution of income and wealth, just to be on the safe side. But then we would realize that we could do better than that, even if we're unlucky and wind up at the bottom. We could do better if we agree to a qualified principle of equality. Rawls calls it the difference principle. A principle that says only those social and economic inequalities will be permitted that work to the benefit of the least well-off. So we wouldn't reject all inequality of income and wealth. We would allow some, but the test would be, do they work to the benefit of everyone, including those, or as he specifies the principle, especially those at the bottom. Only those inequalities would be accepted behind the veil of ignorance, and so Rawls argues, only those inequalities that work to the benefit of the least well-off are just. We talked about the examples of Michael Jordan making $31 million a year, of Bill Gates having a fortune in the tens of billions. Would those inequalities be permitted under the difference principle? Only if they were part of a system, those wage differentials, that actually work to the advantage of the least well-off. Well, what would that system be? Maybe it turns out that as a practical matter, you have to provide incentives to attract the right people to certain jobs. And when you do, having those people in those jobs will actually help those at the bottom. Strictly speaking, Rawls's argument for the difference principle is that it would be chosen behind the veil of ignorance. Let me hear what you think about Rawls's claim that these two principles would be chosen behind the veil of ignorance. Is there anyone who disagrees that they would be chosen? All right, let's start up in the balcony, if that's all right. Go ahead.
Okay, your argument depends upon us believing that we would argue and set policy or justice from a bottom, for the disadvantaged. And I just don't see from a proof standpoint where we've proven that. Why not the top?
Right. And what's your name?
Mike.
Mike, all right, good question. Put yourself behind the veil of ignorance. Enter into the thought experiment. What principles would you choose? How would you think it through?
Well, I would say things like even Harvard's existence is an example of preaching toward the top, because Harvard takes the top academics, and I didn't know when I was born how smart I would be, but I worked my life to get to a place of this caliber. Now, if you'd said Harvard's going to randomly take 1,600 people of absolutely no qualification, we'd all be saying, well, there's not much to work for.
And so what principle would you choose?
In that situation, I would say a merit-based one, where I don't necessarily know what I have, but I'd rather have a system that rewards me based on my efforts.
So you, Mike, behind the veil of ignorance, would choose a merit-based system where people are rewarded according to their efforts. All right, fair enough. What would you say? Go ahead.
My question is, if the merit-based argument is based on when everyone is at a level of equality, where from that position you're rewarded to where you get, or is it regardless of what advantages you may have when you began your education to get where you are here?
I mean, I think what the question you're asking is saying, you know, if we want to look at whatever utilitarianism policy it is, do we want to maximize world wealth? And I think a system that rewards merit is the one that we've pretty much all established is what is best for all of us. Despite the fact that some of us may be in the 2nd percentile and some may be in the 98th percentile, and at the end of the day it lifts that lowest base level, a community that rewards effort as opposed to innate differences.
But I don't understand how your rewarding someone's efforts who clearly has had, not you, but maybe myself, advantages throughout to get where I am here. I mean, I can't say that somebody else who maybe worked as hard as I did would have had the same opportunity to come to a school like this.
All right, let's look at that point. What's your name?
Kate.
Kate, you suspect that the ability to get into top schools may largely depend on coming from an affluent family, having a favorable family background, social, cultural, economic advantages, and so on?
I mean,
We
economic, social,
we
cultural, all of those
we
advantages for sure.
we're listening
Study.
to a discussion on justice uh, coming out of Harvard uh, University, where people are taking a look at why, for example, an individual merits being a student at Harvard. Did it come from privilege? Uh, and should it be based on an equality system? Uh, some of that has something to do with affirmative action because affirmative action is established to lift up the oppressed, lift up those who are at the bottom. And without affirmative action, individuals of color, individuals that don't have uh, this type of background in which people were either intellectual, where they were rich, where they were privileged, where they would rise to the top. So, in order to get those individuals that may have the talent and the ability, that have the talent and the ability to be able to compete and receive this kind of education, will help it to occur. I know of two Harvard graduates, Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, both graduated from Harvard Law School, uh, did not come from privileged backgrounds. Um, and we ask ourselves if affirmative action had did not exist, would we have a Barack Obama as president of the United States? Would we have a brilliant, beautiful woman who was First Lady Michelle Obama as the First Lady of the United States, both people of color? Barack Obama of a mixed heritage, and Michelle Obama, who was I would say a greater percentage of African heritage. But sometimes we get so caught up not only in the racial system, but we get caught up in the caste system, a system where we base individuals' value or worth on what they have in terms of assets, in terms of education, on whether or not they receive just and equal treatment. But that should not be the case because if you don't have a thing economically, first of all, that doesn't say that you don't have the basic talent. It says that you are not in a position to have it. Uh, should you be discriminated against based on that? And affirmative action says no. Affirmative action says that we will not tolerate uh, discrimination, we will not tolerate injustice, and we're going to provide an opportunity in order to have the tools to do that, to make sure that happens, because it doesn't happen on its own, then we have to have a program where you say a certain percentage of this particular uh, job or program has to go with individuals of color or individuals who uh, are female people who are in protected classes. That's what affirmative action is all about. To give you a little bit of my experience, my first affirmative action position was with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and I was set in. I had a community organization background. I was set in to set up a civil rights program, which I did. Uh, we had several elements, and that was in a Republican administration. Schaefer was the governor. Uh, Dr. Thomas George was the secretary of two departments of health and welfare. And Hank Banner was made the director of welfare, and I was made director of the health department's equal opportunity and affirmative action program. And there was a gentleman by the name of Henry Adams who was in the governor's office and was in charge of overall training and equal opportunity and affirmative action. But I had to take a self learning course, a self help course, because I had no experience, no background, no training in equal opportunity or affirmative action. My background was in community organization, uh, uh, in the civil rights movement, battle and marching for justice, but my background was not in affirmative action. But that changed, and we were able to acquire training, and through our own particular, uh, shall we say, knowledge or talent, we were able to develop affirmative action plans uh, to make sure that we check uh, programs within our department to make sure that people of color, uh, people people who were genetically different, were treated the same. And later we developed programs, developed accessibility for those people who are handicapped. And again, I say it all. It started with a gentleman by the name of Art Fletcher, who was a deputy secretary for labor and industry for the depart, for the Nixon administration. He started it. He continued to work with us throughout his life and helped us to program rolling. Now, with me, the health department was my first stop. Um, Later, I uh, left the community uh, and had other positions throughout my history that we'll talk about, which was a very, very great experience. Now, there are also some controversy involved in implementing the program. Some folks felt left out. Some Jewish folks felt left out. Some Asians felt left out. And we're going to jump to another video that deals with whether or not Asian Americans uh, were involved in affirmative action. We have another video that we're going to take a look at.
Up in the education world over the use of race in college admissions.
You cannot remedy past discrimination with new discrimination, and that's what colleges are doing.
The discrimination was so extensive that we had to make colleges just for black people so we could go to college.
Right. Well, Asians are the largest growing segment in the American populace, and yet their numbers at your Harvards, at your elite universities, don't change.
Some Asian American groups say that race-based affirmative action policies actually hurt their chances of attending top colleges. The groups filed a complaint with the federal government in 2015, alleging that Harvard discriminates against Asian American applicants. The Department of Justice agreed to investigate that claim. Does affirmative action hurt Asian Americans? First, we have to define the term.
So affirmative action has a really long history. I think the term was probably first coined by President Kennedy.
Rachel Kleinman is a senior counsel at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund.
And that was with respect to employment programs, federal employment programs, but then really sort of expanded upon and put into place by President Johnson. And the idea was really to put some teeth into some civil rights laws and say, okay, the idea here isn't just to say there is equal opportunity, but to find ways to actually level the playing field.
Since affirmative action policies were enacted, minorities and women have seen increases in university enrollment. The Supreme Court has ruled that the use of race in college admissions is constitutional, as long as explicit quotas aren't used. But some Asian American groups say quotas do exist.
I think I had a 4.6 GPA, something around a 4.7. I had a perfect ACT score.
Michael Wang applied to college in 2013. He was an outstanding student and even sang at President Obama's inauguration. However, he was rejected by every Ivy League school except UPenn. He filed a complaint with the Department of Education alleging that Yale, Stanford, and Princeton discriminated against him because he was Asian American.
I definitely felt like really disappointed, a little bit angry at that point as well. You're not sure why you got in or why you didn't get in. And I think that's what made it really hopeless for me, because if I had to go through this all again, what could I do to maybe improve my chances? I don't have the answer to that.
A 2009 Princeton study found that in order to get into America's top universities, Asian American students' SAT scores had to be 140 points higher than white students, 270 points higher than Hispanic students, and 450 points higher than black students.
That is out of 1,600 points. So that is really unduly harm, creates so much burden on Asian American children.
Yukong Zhao is the president of the Asian American Coalition for Education, a nonprofit fighting for Asian American educational rights. They argue that Ivy League institutions use racial quotas to the detriment of more qualified Asian American applicants.
That is illegal. Most Asian American children want to have a big dream. In order to achieve that, they have to start it with double efforts.
Since the 90s, the population of Asian Americans in the US has more than doubled, but their representation in top universities has remained about the same.
If race is being used as a positive factor, meaning that it helps an application, that's good. When it harms the application, I feel like that's not fair.
Can being of Asian descent actually disadvantage your college application?
Affirmative action is not what is causing Asian Americans not to get into schools. You know, racial quotas are not allowed, and universities, as far as I know, are not using racial quotas. What they are using are holistic admissions policies, which do allow for some consideration of race as one among many factors.
But you can't tell me that a kid who has to score 540 points higher just because of his race, over which he has no control, it's an immutable characteristic, is not being discriminated against.
Why is it that it's affirmative action that they say is causing this, when in fact, in most of these institutions, they are majority white? You don't go to these institutions and feel overwhelmed by the number of black and brown students you see there and say, oh, they must be taking Asian American spots. It's actually still a majority white school. So the fact that this argument that somehow affirmative action is causing it doesn't really seem to have much of a logical basis.
According to a survey by the Harvard Crimson, Asian Americans make up 23.5% of Harvard's freshman class. Black students only make up 11.2%. White students, a whopping 58.2%. Compare that to the percentage of college-age Americans of each race. Asians and whites are overrepresented, but black students are underrepresented. Despite the recent lawsuits, 67% of Asian Americans believe that affirmative action policies are needed.
Yeah, I think there can be no question that we still need affirmative action, among many other things, both to provide opportunities and pathways to opportunities for people of all races, but also to create diverse campuses. Without affirmative action, we wouldn't be creating this diverse group of graduates that we need in order to lead this country, to create business, to compete in the global economy.
Harvard has agreed to hand over years of confidential applicant records to the DOJ, who will then decide whether they've been discriminating against Asian American students. From there, we could be looking at the next landmark affirmative action trial.
As I stated earlier, many groups some groups claim, not many, particularly Asians and also some Jewish groups, feel that that affirmative action has hurt them. Absolutely absurd. It's crazy. There's no way in the world affirmative action will account for just a very, very small percentage of individuals within these programs, educational college programs, and other programs is hindering them. But but they're quick to attack anything that's African American, anything that may lift up in the state that we privilege, and that is a bold-faced lie. It is absolutely not true. not anything close to being true. We still have to struggle and fight. Uh, we still have uh, less ability, less access to resources, money, scholarship, things that we need in order to continue the battle, and that's a fact. With my experience there, first of all, at the health department, um, in state government, let me just start out by saying that if you were to come back in the day to work for state government, back in the day it was a political kind of thing, and you had to get some kind of sponsorship in order to get in. And we had individual ward leaders that had to sponsor you to get a clerk job. I mean, we're not talking about fancy, high level professional job, any kind of job with state government. Discrimination was there. So we had to know not only deal with discrimination, we had to crack this political system. It is now the largest employer within the state of Pennsylvania, hiring tens, uh, hiring tens and tens of individuals, within the Commonwealth. So it was very, very, very important to know the system, how to get in. And in devising and developing affirmative action plan, we had to set goals. We had to set goals. We are hiring goals. We had to make sure that when individuals are doing recruitment, that they recruit in those areas where you would also not only get white employees, but you would get other employees. I went all over the country, in different parts of the country, doing recruitment to make sure that uh, people of color were part of the pool of applicants that individuals were taking a look at, and this was very, very, very important. And so I went to Bethune-Cookman, for example, Wilberforce University, Cheney University. We went to schools. A gentleman by the name of Barton Fields, who later became the Secretary of State and also at one point was Secretary of Revenue. When he started out, he did a lot of recruitment. Bart would go in different places and then recruit individuals and bring them to the state government or the school district or educational system. That's something that he did. He was also president of the local chapter of the NAACP, and he's still alive. I understand that he's in Philadelphia, uh, and a great man that did a great, great, great thing. But what happens is that we allow ourselves to get in as minorities to begin to fight each other rather than taking a look at the historical significance of racism and discrimination that has affected all of us. And we start pointing fingers and we start blaming each other. Um, when I left the health department, left Harrisburg at one point, I moved to the West Coast and I worked for the city of Seattle. I was director of equal opportunity. And again, we were still in the process of developing systems. We had a civil service commission that was the systematic hiring of individuals for the city of Seattle. And we built in a monitoring system in which we would evaluate the tests that uh, we were using uh, to qualify people with, to make sure that those tests did not discriminate against individuals, to make sure that they were of sound value. We built in also recruitment. We broke the barriers of sex in departments like the police department and the fire department, and we were able to recruit women into those areas. Basically, doing this is opening up areas of opportunity. And see, when you open up areas of opportunity, then you increase the work pool, you get even better and more qualified individuals to come in and work for your workforce. Um, Sometimes there's a problem in bringing qualified people in. And when you limit your recruitment to whites only, uh, then you get whites only. And so people of color uh, or other folks, we lose out on their talent and we lose out on their individual skills. And I was blessed in terms of my career to work for individuals who saw that, who understood that, and helped to set up programs to do it. The other thing in terms of bringing folks in, and dealing with areas of discrimination, also just promoting the opportunities that exist for employment in a particular industry. Now, I worked for the city of Seattle for until there was a change of administrations, and then I worked also for King County, and was hired then by a man by the name of Ron Dunlop and Asani Taha when they were there. Uh, Later, I worked for uh, uh, a gentleman by the name of Tim Hill, who appointed me as special assistant to him, and later made me director of also the Opportunity Affirmative Action Program. And along the way, we learned more about the issues and more about the program and more about the needs. When we look at people and they're interrelated and they're interconnected. For example, you can't, for example, separate equal opportunity from education, equal opportunity from economy, because if folks don't have the resources to do the job and the education to be prepared to come in and the preparation to come in, then it's going to be difficult, very, very difficult to bring them into the arena uh, of that dealt with the whole area of equal opportunity and affirmative action. These programs are of a necessity, uh, and they continue to be a necessity. We had, for example, uh, a bigoted president, a right wing president, uh, Mr. Trump, who who did not support affirmative action, equal opportunity. When you just look at the lack of diversity in his own administration and some of the negative things that he would say, some of the most horrendous things he would say about Africa or Africans or people of color. That's my black boy over there. I mean, he just a horrendous kind of thing, and then still American people made changes in that particular area. Uh, so anyway, Chris, when we go back to that first film, the second half of that first film that we took a look at, you see some of the other comments that were made by students uh, on justice system.
Of the 146 selective colleges and universities in the United States, and they looked at the students in those colleges and universities to try to find out what their background was, their economic background. What percentage do you think come from the bottom quarter of the income scale? You know what the figure is? Only 3% of students at the most selective colleges and universities come from poor backgrounds. Over 70% come from affluent families. Let's go one step further then and try to address Mike's challenge. Rawls actually has two arguments, not one, in favor of his principles of justice, and in particular of the difference principle. One argument is the official argument. what would be chosen behind the veil of ignorance. Some people challenge that argument, saying maybe people would want to take their chances. Maybe people would be gamblers behind the veil of ignorance, hoping that they would wind up on top. That's one challenge that has been put to Rawls. But backing up the argument from the original position is a second argument. And that is a straightforwardly moral argument. And it goes like this. It says, the distribution of income and wealth and opportunities should not be based on factors for which people can claim no credit. It shouldn't be based on factors that are arbitrary from a moral point of view. Rawls illustrates this by considering several rival theories of justice. He begins with the theory of justice that most everyone these days would reject: a feudal aristocracy. What's wrong with the allocation of life prospects in a feudal aristocracy? Rawls says, well, the thing that's obviously wrong about it is that people's life prospects are determined by the accident of birth. Are you born to a noble family or to the family of peasants and serfs? And that's it. You can't rise. It's not your doing where you wind up or what opportunities you have. But that's arbitrary from a moral point of view. And so that objection to a feudal aristocracy leads, and historically has led people to say, careers should be open to talents. There should be formal equality of opportunity, regardless of the accident of birth. Every person should be free to strive, to work, to apply for any job in the society. And then, if you open up jobs and you allow people to apply and to work as hard as they can, then the results are just. So it's more or less the libertarian system that we've discussed in earlier weeks. What does Rawls think about this? He says it's an improvement. It's an improvement because it doesn't take as fixed the accident of birth. But even with formal equality of opportunity, the libertarian conception doesn't extend its insight far enough. Because if you let everybody run the race, everybody can enter the race, but some people start at different starting points, that race isn't going to be fair. Intuitively, he says, the most obvious injustice of this system is that it permits distributive shares to be improperly influenced by factors arbitrary from a moral point of view, such as whether you got a good education or not, whether you grew up in a family that supported you and developed in you a work ethic and gave you the opportunities. So that suggests moving to a system of fair equality of opportunity. And that's really the system that Mike was advocating earlier on, what we might call a merit-based system, a meritocratic system. In a fair meritocracy, the society sets up institutions to bring everyone to the same starting point before the race begins. Equal educational opportunities, Head Start programs, for example, support for schools in impoverished neighborhoods, so that everyone, regardless of their family background, has a genuinely fair opportunity. Everyone starts from the same starting line. Well, what does Rawls think about the meritocratic system? Even that, he says, doesn't go far enough in remedying or addressing the moral arbitrariness of the natural lottery. Because if you bring everyone to the same starting point and begin the race, who's going to win the race? who would win? To use the runners example. The fastest runners would win. But is it their doing that they happen to be blessed with the athletic prowess to run fast? So Rawls says, even the principle of meritocracy, where you bring everyone to the same starting point, may eliminate the influence of social contingencies and upbringing, but it still permits the distribution of wealth and income to be determined by the natural distribution of abilities and talents. And so he thinks that the principle of eliminating morally arbitrary influences in the distribution of income and wealth requires going beyond what Mike favors, the meritocratic system. Now, how do you go beyond? If you bring everyone to the same starting point, and you're still bothered by the fact that some are fast runners and some are not fast runners, what can you do? Well, some critics of a more egalitarian conception say the only thing you can do is handicap the fast runners. Make them wear lead shoes. But who wants to do that? That would defeat the whole point of running the race. But Rawls says you don't have to have a kind of leveling equality if you want to go beyond a meritocratic conception. You permit, you even encourage those who may be gifted to exercise their talents. But what you do is you change the terms on which people are entitled to the fruits of the exercise of those talents. And that really is what the difference principle is. You establish a principle that says people may benefit from their good fortune, from their luck in the genetic lottery, but only on terms that work to the advantage of the least well-off. And so, for example, Michael Jordan can make $31 million, but only under a system that taxes away a chunk of that to help those who lack the basketball skills that he's blessed with. Likewise, Bill Gates. He can make his billions, but he can't think that he somehow morally deserves those billions. Those who have been favored by nature may gain from their good fortune, but only on terms that improve the situation of those who have lost out. That's the difference principle. And it's an argument from moral arbitrariness. Rawls claims that if you're bothered by basing distributive shares on factors arbitrary from a moral point of view, you don't just reject a feudal aristocracy for a free market. You don't even rest content with a meritocratic system that brings everyone to the same starting point. You set up a system where everyone, including those at the bottom, benefit from the exercise of the talents held by those who happen to be lucky. What do you think? Is that persuasive? Who finds that argument unpersuasive, the argument from moral arbitrariness? Yes?
I think that in the egalitarian proposition, the more talented people, I think it's very optimistic to think that they would still work really hard even if they knew that part of what they made would be given away. So I think that the only way for the more talented people to exercise their talents to the best of their ability is in the meritocracy.
And in a meritocracy, what's your name?
Kate.
Kate, does it bother you, and Mike, does it bother you, that in a meritocratic system, even with fair equality of opportunity, people get ahead, people get rewards that they don't deserve simply because they happen to be naturally gifted? What about that?
I think that it is arbitrary, and obviously it's arbitrary, but I think that that correcting for it would be detrimental. And unlike...
Because it would reduce incentives, is that why?
It would reduce incentives, yeah.
Mike, what do you say?
We're all sitting in this room and we have undeserved glory of some sort, that you should not be satisfied with the process of your life because you have not created any of this. And I think from a standpoint of not just this room, us being upset, but from a societal standpoint, we should have some kind of a gut reaction to that feeling that, you know, the guy who runs the race, he actually harms us as opposed to maybe makes me run that last 10 yards faster, and that makes the guy behind me run 10 yards faster, and the guy behind him 10 yards faster.
All right, so Mike, let me ask you, you talked about effort before. Effort. Do you think when people work hard to get ahead and succeed, that they deserve the rewards that go with effort? Isn't that the idea behind your defensive?
I mean, of course, bring Michael Jordan here, I'm sure you can get him, and have him come and defend himself about why he makes $31 million. And I think what you're going to realize is his life was a very, very tough one to get to the top, and that we are basically being the majority oppressing the minority in a different light.
Coming down,
Very
we're coming down to the end of our show, end of our show. Wish we could continue, but do you get the drift? You know, there are things that are basic that cause there to be a need for affirmative action. Folks that may not have the education, may not have the family background, need to be lifted up and helped in some kind of way, an equal opportunity. We'll have to do this again to get more heavily involved and share this information with you on affirmative action. I want to again thank you for tuning in. Uh, I try to remind folks every week that we still have a business that we're running. We're down in Lebanon at 35 South 8th Street. And here's pictures of some of the things that we have. In fact, since we've taken this picture, we've added more inventory. We got some wonderful drums and some of the most beautiful drums from Senegal and from Ghana. We have beautiful clothing in. So hey, come to see us. Come to see us and look at our tall giraffes. And our prices are phenomenal. We don't try to make all our money on one side sale. Uh, we are there. This is a picture of Maria that's been helping out. Thank you, dear. That's my daughter. She's been helping to run the show. But I'm back. I'm back there at the stand now, running it myself. So come on and come down and see me. I love to see you. Love to talk to you. We can share some history. We always have some special books that we want to share with you also. And by the way, I have a new release of my CD uh, that I produced back in, I think it was 2001, was about sensitive men, the love notes from a sensitive man. So we got copies of that. So we got a number of things that we're doing and we're sharing, and we're saying, as I said earlier, stories of my demise have been greatly exaggerated. I'm getting better, folks. I'm beginning to be able to walk around without that walker. Uh, so it's all good, and God bless. And so we thank you for tuning in again, and we wish you the very best. Much love to you and everyone. And thanks, Chris, man, for all your help and your patience in putting this thing together, man. You and the family, we really appreciate you and appreciate others. So God bless. Until we see you again and next week. This is Richard James. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you again for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Our African and our African American programs are set up to educate you on what's going on in this world. And thank you for taking out the time to listen. Let us hear from you sometime also. So this is your neighbor and your friend signing off. And so I'll see you again next week and hear from you again next week. So long. God bless.